Now, so session 4, we have Erich Manser. So Erich Manser is the athlete with whom I ran the Boston Marathon in 2019 as an official guide. And a little bit about him. Erich is 47. He lives outside of Boston. And his wife, Lisa, and daughters are Ellie, who is 14 years. Grace is 11 years. I met them last year when I went there. He's a very avid runner and a triathlete, and has completed 20 marathons and 3 Ironman triathlons, including the 2018 Ironman World Championships in Kona, Hawaii. He's currently working at Howard University as a digital accessibility consultant, where he helps ensure all the Howard websites are inclusive and can be accessed by people of all abilities. He has been staying active during the COVID-19 by participating in online running events, including a 23.44-mile summer solstice challenge, and currently a virtual endurance challenge to complete 305 miles in 6 weeks. Wow, that's amazing. Welcome, Erich, to the session, and I'm so glad you're here. So we just start with the first, what we wanted to know. Could you tell the audience a little bit about what is the concept of guide runners for visually impaired? From your perspective, we wanted to know from you. So over to you, Erich.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. No, I'm delighted to, and thank you so much, Bhumika. It's great to be here, and I'm very privileged to be on the call. So thank you so much. Just to describe a little bit about guide running and the concept of being a sighted guide. For many blind and visually impaired people who wish to kind of remain active and healthy, oftentimes there can be additional challenges, even during normal times without the COVID-19 crisis. There can be added difficulties for people with blindness or visual impairment to be able to stick to a fitness routine, and to, kind of maintain a routine, can often bring some added challenges beyond just, what regular, people trying to exercise might experience. So, things like logistical challenges, like, how do you go about getting to a fitness center or to a gym, or join in a group activity like a group fitness workout, or even, simply going out the door to go for a walk or go for a run, all take additional planning and thought ahead of time. So in this way, having a willing volunteer, like someone who agrees to kind of help you, kind of get around some of those challenges and kind of lend their eyesight is extremely helpful. When a sighted guide volunteers to assist a blind or visually impaired person to remain active, in many cases, it's literally life-changing for that person. Like, it makes such a huge difference in their lives. Because essentially what it does is it takes something that was, either very, very difficult for that person or, literally impossible, and suddenly makes it possible for them to do. And so it's very empowering in that way. With regards to being a sighted guide, like the most important aspect of being a guide runner is the willingness to give of your time and energy in order to assist another person. And so, that desire to kind of volunteer is very, very important. And, I can say, as someone who relies, on sighted guides a lot, and especially like, with you, Bhumika, running in Boston with me, it's extremely helpful and very, very much appreciated. So, that's kind of the backstory on being a sighted guide.
So what would you say are some of the prerequisites for someone to become a guide runner?
Well, in my mind, I'd say the number one prerequisite to becoming a guide runner is definitely the desire to help. Guiding blind athletes, in my mind, is absolutely a very selfless act. Like, you're very much giving of yourself. And so, you know, oftentimes we hear that the intangible benefits, like the rewards that you get from being a sighted guide, are often far greater than the effort it takes to volunteer. And so, you know, it's a very kind of almost uplifting experience. Other prerequisites that I might suggest, you know, beyond the desire to help, it's key to have that desire to help. Like, you have the urge to give back or to help make the world a better place. But in addition to that, you know, the willingness to volunteer, because, you know, the reality is that you are sacrificing time and energy. Like it takes time and energy to do this. So you're giving up some of that time and energy. So, you know, that willingness to volunteer is important. It's also good if you're eager to learn, you know, that it's going to be a very new experience. I mean, you know, oftentimes, you know, people have been running for years, and that, you know, all of a sudden you're asked to kind of run and describe everything that's happening while you're running for someone else. And that's a very different experience for a lot of people. So, you know, the willingness to learn about that and kind of have that new experience is important. Also, flexibility is key. You know, I would suggest if you can, make an effort to adapt, you know, your normal approach to running to, you know, to better accommodate, I guess, you know, how the blind or visually impaired athlete would run, because, you know, ultimately, you know, you are giving of yourself to allow this person to be able to do this. But, you know, as much as they can kind of stick to how they would, you know, their preferences or their methods, you know, that's very helpful if possible. Another prerequisite is communication. I think Bhumika and I, you know, we experienced this in Boston, where the crowds and the cheering crowds were so noisy. Like, communication is very important. So you need to be prepared to, you know, while you're running, you need to be able to speak consistently and comfortably, you know, so, you know, you shouldn't be out of breath. You should be able to talk comfortably and provide guidance, verbal guidance to the athlete while you're engaged in the activity of running. And, you know, at times it requires you to speak loudly. So, you know, that communication ability is key as well. And I'd say maybe the last prerequisite I would suggest is persistence. You know, the blind athlete and sighted guide relationship is just like any other relationship. And, you know, it can take some time to find the perfect fit. You know, you may try running with, you know, an athlete, and you may find that you don't necessarily connect or you know, gel as a team. So, you know, it may take a few attempts to find, you know, the right athlete to train and race with. And, you know, that's fine. You know, patience and persistence are important as well. You know, but again, as I said at the very beginning, like the number one prerequisite in my mind is the desire to help. If you have the desire to help, then all the other prerequisites can kind of fall into place, and you can develop those. The most important is that desire to help, I would say.
Yeah, Rick, I remember that all along the Boston Marathon route, we were constantly talking, and yeah, there were phases where both of us were like little kind of low, and the crowd cheered us so much that it was like amazing. It was like magic. We just picked up pace after that.
Even during rough patches where you're feeling exhausted, like that crowd energy can carry you through a lot of the time. So that's nice, you know.
That was so much fun. They used to read the text on our T-shirt, and they used to call out our names from very far. So that
Yep,
was like amazing.
that's
So
cool.
just to summarize what Eric said, that some of the prerequisites for a guide runner is a desire to help, willingness to volunteer, eagerness to learn, flexibility, communication, and persistence.
Yep.
Thank you for that. And how does a guide set pace with a visually impaired runner? A little bit about the practice and approaches.
Yeah, I'd say, you know, in an ideal situation, you know, the visually impaired runner will have shared, you know, to the point of communication. You know, ideally the visually impaired runner will have shared what their preferred pace or their target pace is beforehand, so that that going in. And then the guide, I mean, really is, once you kind of agree on what the desired pace will be, then the guide can kind of use whatever tracking method they normally use, whether the guide has a Garmin watch or whatever kind of watch or method that the guide would normally use. As long as you agree on the pace ahead of time, and then the guide can kind of do whatever they normally do to keep track of pace as you're running. As desired pace, I mean, as runners, I mean, we understand that, that desired pace can vary a little bit, depending on the day and the conditions and the weather and, how you're feeling. So your target pace, may be, faster on one day and a little bit more reserved on another day. So, it's kind of, the target pace is subject to change for sure. But again, I think it really just reinforces the importance of clear and active communication. Like, as long as you're both on the same page and you both, have expressed, what the pace should be, then you should be in good shape. You're going to be on the same page. Again, as I started to describe, I think a little bit, like, since the key intention behind guide running is to enable the visually impaired runner to participate in fitness in ways that they otherwise might not be able to, it's best when volunteering, the guide can adapt to allow the visually impaired athlete to follow their preferred methods. I mean, that's extremely helpful. And again, as a visually impaired athlete myself, it's something that is very much appreciated to, to have that feeling that, I can go and try and have my race, and you're there to, as the guide to help me do that is extremely helpful and valuable. But again, to that point, it's also very flexible. I mean, there are two people involved. You can kind of come to an agreement in terms of what the exact right strategy is on any given day. But it is a helpful and flexible relationship. So again, I keep saying communication is key, but having that relationship and strong communication between each visually impaired runner and guide is an essential piece.
So Eric, a little bit on if I have a marathon guide with whom I have been training, but my actual race guide changes because of whatever reason. So how do you manage that?
Well, it can be a little tricky. I mean, I've gotten to a point in my running where at any given time, I have a good number of guides kind of available and ready and willing to race or run with me at any given time. So it, just by virtue of that fact, like, it makes you very adaptable. And so oftentimes the guides that I'll train with the most, I can easily find myself in a situation where, someone may not be available, so that when I need to race, it might be someone that I've only run with like once or twice before. So again, you do have to be prepared to adjust and adapt. So I think the biggest thing is, I mean, the biggest difference between training and racing, for sure, and guiding for that is, for training runs, there's a little bit less pressure. I mean, the atmosphere is entirely different. When you're in a race setting, it tends to be more crowded, more sort of a highly pressurized situation. And, training, especially where I live, where I'm kind of set outside the city a little bit, we can get on very quiet and desolate roads and kind of run with very little risk. Whereas in a crowded race, with runners all around you and I mean, certainly, during normal times where, where we're not social distancing and things like that, you can be very packed in very tightly and things like that. And so, it very much changes the dynamics. So, I think you recall, Bhumika, I do have some remaining vision. I've got a small amount of eyesight left.
Yes.
And so when I'm running in training runs,
Yeah.
you know, I don't even really necessarily have to use the tether. You remember, I
Yeah.
get right behind you
Yeah.
and follow directly behind because I can see enough to do
Yeah.
that safely. But in a race, you know, we wear the blind bibs and the guide bibs like on our shirts.
Yeah.
You know, I also use the tether, like the bungee cord tether, just because those things are much more needed in a crowded race environment. So it really kind of changes the dynamics. But again, you know, ideally, if I have the ability, I'll you know, choose to race with people that I've been able to run with at least a few times before. But there have been times where I find myself either on my first or second run with the person being in a race. So, you know, again, it's important to be adaptable.
Yeah. So I have also, we have seen the situation where if a blind athlete is very fast, then we have two guides in the race. So there is a point where you can switch over the guide. So if it's a 2 hour 15-minute full marathon race, then the half marathon is done by one guide and the other half is done by the other guide. Have you had experience with that?
Well, I can't say I've had a need to exchange guides. I'm not that fast at running. I mean, I came from a swimming background, and so I tend to have a greater difficulty finding swim guides that I can swim with, just because I was a collegiate swimmer.
Yeah.
But you know, I do know some very fast, blind young runners that, you know, definitely need to have, you know, 2 or 3 guides for a race, and usually in any race where they allow that. They'll have very designated areas to have the exchange points. You know, so it's pretty strict that you need to swap, you know, guides at those very specific points along the race course. But yeah, I mean, these days, you know, my best marathon was, you know, close to 3:30, and these days I'm running closer to 4 hours. So, you know, most of my guides that I run with are capable of running that, you know, the full distance in that amount of time. So
Wow. So can you share a little bit about your training for Ironman?
yeah, it's you know, it's interesting to reflect on. Like prior to my first Ironman, which I did in 2015, you know, I used to consider marathon training to be, you know, very, very time consuming and, you know, even grueling at times, which it is. You know, I definitely still have that appreciation. But, you know, I did realize later that for me, you know, having a run specific focus, like when I am training for a marathon, is still time consuming. But it just feels a little simpler to have like the one activity to focus on, you know, because it's almost refreshing to be able to kind of limit your focus just to running. You know, and I didn't realize that until I started training, you know, for kind of an endurance multi-sport event like triathlon. So when I train for a marathon, again, my main focus is generally just food, sleep, and miles, right? Or, you know, kilometers. Um, but, you know, I don't typically, when marathon training, like I'm not someone who typically does a lot of like core strength or cross training or anything like that. So it's really just a matter for me of just building up my mileage. Um, and, you know, in that way, it seems much more straightforward in terms of developing my training plan and you know, putting together my strategy. So again, I really, generally speaking, am just looking to build my mileage. I do include some variety kind of in my runs. I think like most of us probably do. Like, you know, I add some speed workouts, maybe at the track, or some tempo runs. You know, maybe some mid-distance tempo runs. And generally, when I'm gearing up for a marathon, I usually always take 1 day off per week, you know, just to rest and recover. But, you know, when I was training for the Ironman, again, you know, some real noticeable differences. You know, I found that I had, you know, some activity, you know, that was planned or scheduled all 7 days of the week. Like every day of the week, I had something on the calendar. Um, you know, and I mean, these can be activities of varied intensity, but, you know, depending on the day or the objective of any session, like, you know, I did have kind of a variety of things, but all days of the week. You know, so most days, you know, looking back, I had 2 or 3 activities scheduled. Whether it was a case of, you know, I had a swim in the morning, maybe a run in the afternoon, or, you know, maybe a bike ride in the morning with some core strength at lunchtime, and then an easy swim to loosen up in the evening. You know, but each day, every day of the week, I had something that you know, I had to do. You know, so generally speaking, I've typically built, you know, the time and intensity over the course of my training schedule. You know, so, you know, including like the workout duration, like it would be a gradual build over a period of about 4 or 5 months, you know, leading up to the big event. And typically what I would do is aim to allow for like 2 to 3 weeks of rest or taper, you know, before race day. So I would generally build up until about 2 or 3 weeks out from race day, and then, you know, back the training off just to be recovering in time, you know, for race day. You know, so one thing I can admit to is that, you know, I don't think I've always been great about timing my taper correctly, because, you know, oftentimes when I would have the big race, whether it's a marathon or an Ironman triathlon, like, you know, more than once, I've definitely felt myself like a week after the race, like still feeling like I was recovering. So I think I need to do better with kind of timing my taper and, you know, hitting it correctly so that I'm recovering and bouncing back in time for race day. I think there's a little more practice I need there, but you know, it's interesting and definitely a kind of an ongoing experiment, but, you know, some definite differences there in terms of training for a marathon versus training for an Ironman.
How about your nutritional requirements? How did you manage your nutrition? What changes did you make?
Well, that was, you know, very much an experiment, you know, in the training. Like every training run or you know, training session, especially like, you know, a big part of the Ironman training included like, you know, you would do a long run after getting off the bike, or, you know, because it's multi-sport, you know, generally speaking on the weekends or when I had more time, you know, beyond just the normal work day, I would plan like a long bike ride followed by, you know, a run. And so, you know, generally you would want to be sure that you were carrying nutrition with you. And if you know, were experimenting with different types of nutrition, that's the time to do it. Because if, you know, if something is either not going to agree with you or is not going to work well for you, that's where you want to discover that, is during training and not on race day. So, you know, there was definitely a lot of experimentation with nutrition when I was, you know, in the height of the training. You know, I will say that, you know, I'm kind of, you know, a bigger person. You know, I'm about 200 pounds. So, you know, I lose a lot through sweat, just generally. I think I sweat quite a bit. And so my efforts to kind of replenish and replace, you know, what I'm losing through sweat did require a lot of experimentation as well. So I take a lot of like the gels, you know, I take the energy gels, and I also, you know, use like the drink mixes, like the electrolyte mixes in my drink. And, you know, I've even experimented with things like soup broth, you know, like salty soup broth. And, you know, so again, just playing around with, you know, the different types of fueling that are available, and seeing what works best for you. It took a lot of trial and error, but, you know, in training is where I tried to perfect that and, you know, figure out what works best for you. And then by the time you get out on the race course, ideally you have that all dialed in, and you figured out what will work for you on race day.
Wow, that's amazing. So, yeah, a little bit about your accessible technologies work that you do with Harvard University. How do these accessible applications work? Um, how can they be used by the visually impaired and the guides when they are running, or for other things apart from running?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate in my professional life. I mean, outside of racing and training, like I'm very lucky to be able to do something I love. You know, as someone who has, you know, personally been experiencing vision loss, you know, the ability to use technology is very important to me. And the fact that I get to do that now for a job and make sure that technology is being, you know, designed and created in ways that, you know, people with disabilities can use it equally, is something that I feel very strongly about and very lucky to be able to do. So, you know, before I joined Harvard, I worked at, you know, some large tech companies like HP and at IBM, and I was part of their accessibility teams. And so, you know, I learned a lot about accessibility and the importance of it. And so by the time I got to Harvard, I actually just joined Harvard in January of this year, just, you know, before the COVID-19 crisis really hit here in the US. And, you know, I was excited because, you know, Harvard as a university just announced a very, you know, comprehensive accessibility policy that applies all, you know, across campus to all schools and all classes. And so, you know, the team that I'm part of is responsible for helping roll out that policy. So, you know, while, you know, when I was at, you know, companies like IBM, you know, I got to do a lot of research-oriented accessibility work, which included, you know, trying out new navigational devices. I think you recall, Bhumika, I actually ran Boston one year wearing smart glasses and, you know, had someone guiding me remotely. You know, so kind of cutting edge technology and, you know, interesting things that were kind of geared towards helping blind people navigate. And, you know, while I'm at Harvard now, I'm much more focused on, you know, kind of the standards for accessibility and making sure that, you know, the websites that, you know, that are available from Harvard are being designed in ways that are accessible to all people. And so, you know, I've kind of been able to experience a lot of facets of accessibility. And, you know, what I'm doing now is, you know, particularly interesting because it's, you know, very much about, you know, helping make sure that all of Harvard's websites and mobile applications can be used by everyone and, you know, used with ease and equal access. So, you know, it's fun to be a part of, and, you know, it's extremely gratifying to feel like you're contributing to make the world more accessible and make technology more accessible for everyone.
So, Eric, can you tell us a little bit more about the navigation technology that you used in the Boston Marathon? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, that technology is very popular. I know it is expanding globally. I'm not sure it's available in India yet, but it's a technology called IRA, and that's AIRA. And it's, you know, basically sighted assistance on demand, right? So it's a smartphone app, you know, it's an app that you have on your phone that pairs with a like a smart glass camera. I mean, you can use it with your phone's camera, but generally speaking, most people will use it with a camera that's mounted on smart glasses, you know, like Google Glass, or they have their own, you know, version of glasses that you can wear as well that have a camera mounted right in the, like the middle and the nose piece. And so what happens is once you have the app, you know, you activate the IRA app on your phone, and it connects you with a human being, like a sighted human somewhere else in the world, that as soon as you're connected with them, they are then accessing the live stream from the camera that you're wearing. And so as a blind or visually impaired person, you know, this can be very, very helpful to have that on-demand sighted help if I wanted to do something like read mail, or, you know, if I was in, you know, looking for the, you know, what type of soup I want in the kitchen, like in my cabinet, right? So, it can be very helpful to, like, in any given moment, be able to kind of summon help from a sighted person, and, you know, is extremely valuable in that way. Now, the way that we used it, running a marathon, is not what that technology was designed to do,
Okay.
but you know, it was definitely kind of an extreme test of the technology.
Wow.
But overall, the experiment that we did went very well. And when I ran it, you know, in that year, that was 2017 that we did that. You know, so I was running with the app and the glasses, and I had an earbud, and there was a woman named Jessica who was sitting in Ohio here in the U.S., and I was running in Boston, and she was describing, you know, what was around me, and you know, kind of keeping me running straight, and would alert me if, you know, the water stops or the aid stations were coming up and things like that. So, you know, it was a fun experiment. It was definitely, you know, had some challenges because it is such a crowded race, you know, with so many runners around you. But you
Was
know,
there a guide next to you all the time, or did you run solo?
no, I mean, we wanted to, out of respect, some accessibility. There are some free tools that exist that allow you to, like, do an automated check for accessibility. So you can plug in the URL of any given website, and they have scanners that you can run where basically it will, you know, scan the web page for any possible, you know, accessibility barriers. So, you know, you can check out things like WebAIM or AXE. Like, they have these free scanners that are available to kind of, you know, do a preliminary look to see if there are any obvious, you know, accessibility barriers that exist on a page, if you're trying to recommend or suggest pages to people who are blind or visually impaired. But, you know, just in general terms, there are some key areas, like especially for blind and visually impaired users, to be mindful of when considering web pages. You know, just in terms of the design of, or the layouts of web pages, you know, things like page titles, you know, should be very clear, and make, you know, very clear what is being, you know, what is included on the page, or contained on a web page. You know, the information structure, you want to make sure that, you know, the page is structured in such a way that the content is logical, and things are grouped in logical ways. You know, headings are very important. You know, for many people who are totally blind and use screen readers, you know, oftentimes they navigate by headings. So, you know, if you think about it as someone visual who, you know, someone with vision who, you know, encounters a web page, you know, oftentimes what we'll do is we'll just scan it visually. Like, you know, you kind of, you know, kind of just quickly scan the page to decide, you know, what you really are interested in and what you want to read more about on that page. Well, you know, screen readers allow you to very much do the same thing, but in a non-visual way. So, you know, someone using a screen reader can scan a page's content just by headings. So being, you know, paying attention to, you know, how headings are being used and making sure that they're, you know, they're clear and descriptive is important. You know, semantic markup on a page is important. Again, it kind of gives that structure. I mean, again, where screen reader users rely on identifying, you know, like making sure that form fields are labeled. You know, if there's a field where you can enter your email address, make sure it is, you know, labeled as such, and clearly marked in that way. So, you know, just having the page marked up in such a way that allows, you know, for, like, you know, headings are clearly headings and paragraphs are clearly paragraphs. Just it helps make it clear, you know, for someone using a screen reader. For someone like myself with low vision, you know, I rely on contrast, like, you know, the legibility of a page. It's important that, you know, that contrast be, you know, sufficient, like, you know, having the text stand out clearly against the background rather than, you know, having like gray text on a gray background where it's very hard to tell one from the other. It, you know, it makes it nice if everything's clearly legible and can, you know, be seen with sufficient contrast. Readability is also very important. You know, you know, just again, the content clarity, making sure that, you know, everything is, you know, is visual on the page. The language that's used on a page, it's important that it be easy to understand and, you know, and can be comprehended quickly. A couple more that I'll mention, like, you know, whenever links are used, like if there's a link, you know, to somewhere else or, you know, a link to a different resource, it should be clearly a link. You know, oftentimes this can be done by making link text a different color and having it underlined, and also make the link text descriptive so that, you know, it's clear where it will take you if you click on that link rather than just having a random string of letters or numbers. It's very helpful if it kind of spells out exactly where the link will take you. Two of the most important are alt text or alternative text. Again, especially for screen reader users, if there are a lot of pictures or images on the page, if they are meaningful to the page, like if they are specifically related to, you know, the text and what's being communicated on the page, it's important that any of those images include like descriptions of what the images are. Because if you're using a screen reader and you come across an image, if it doesn't have descriptive text that tells you what it is, you know, the screen reader will just say, you know, image, and that it won't tell you anything about it. And, you know, as a screen reader user, it's much more helpful if it says, you know, picture of a dog with a ball or whatever it might be, as, you know, as long as, you know, the one exception there is if it's purely decorative, like if it's not something that's meaningful to the rest of the web page, then there's no reason to necessarily include the description because it's only decorative, but you can, you know, indicate that it's just a decorative image. And then media alternatives, you know, things that we've heard of probably, you know, things like captioning, you know, using audio description, which is, you know, if you have a video, you know, many on the call may have heard of audio description, which, you know, for blind or visually impaired people, kind of gives a running description of what is happening on the screen in addition to the audio that goes along with the video. So that can be very helpful. I feel like I'm trying to get a lot in, but you know, I wanted to make sure I touched on all of them. So a lot of information, and, you know, obviously, you know, I welcome any questions or you know, clarification on that as well.
Yeah, Eric. So that is the reason why accessibility testers are very important for the tech industry.
For
Everything
sure.
technology has to be accessible. So for a simple thing like many of the visually impaired are on Facebook, they are also on Instagram, and they're using a lot of social media. So on Facebook, when we post a picture, and all text is the very basic thing that needs to be there, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's extremely helpful. And I can't tell you how appreciative, like, you know, many of my blind and visually impaired friends, I mean, it's, you know, for a long time, it's been so, you know, it's been something that honestly has been overlooked a lot. And so now when we see more and more people remembering to include it, it's like such a nice
It's very,
experience.
yeah.
Yeah, very helpful.
Yeah, I see a lot of 100% blind people reacting to some of the posts, and I think this is the alt text, which is what they are reading.
It's
That's,
wonderful.
yeah, it's amazing. So Eric, also from the COVID-19 perspective, what are the special precautions that you are taking when you go to work or when you go for a fitness activity outdoor, and what would be your advice to new guide runners and the existing guides on how they can plan their activity?
Well, I consider myself very spoiled because, you know, I very much am able to kind of stay home because, you know, at Harvard now we're working at home full time. And so really the only time I need to go out most days is to go out for my run. And again, as I described, you know, I am, you know, a bit outside of the city where it's, you know, heavily populated. So, you know, when I go out for a run, it's usually early in the morning and I only have 2 people that I'm currently training with. And so, you know, my risk with COVID currently is very low. So, you know, in terms of precautions, you know, I wear a mask, but, you know, I don't necessarily wear that on all of my runs, especially on runs where we're doing a lot of hills, because it's very difficult to do hills with the mask. So in the past, you know, when I would run behind my guide runners, I would run, you know, usually only a few feet or a few meters behind them. And now I run, you know, I leave a much more distance between myself and my guide runner. And then, you know, we don't usually encounter many others out either walking or running while we're out running. But when we do, we definitely cross, you know, completely to the other side of the street. You know, I rely obviously on my sighted guides to, you know, to let me know when we're doing that. But, you know, we're usually able to safely navigate around, you know, any others that we might encounter while we're out, you know, any other people that might be out recreationally while we're out running. So, you know, fortunately for me, you know, I haven't had to really take a lot of precautions. Now, I do know a lot of my blind and visually impaired running friends who live in more, you know, highly concentrated areas are doing a lot more experimentation with different types of tethers. You know, I even have heard of, you know, a few friends that have used like, you know, like the tether I normally use, as you recall, Bhumika, is a bungee cord, like a stretchy cord. And, you know, many of my running friends or blind running friends would, you know, traditionally use the same type of cord, but now with COVID, they are actually using like rigid, like PVC pipe or plastic pipe. And they get like 6 feet of it because, you know, here in the US, the recommendation is to allow 6 feet of distance between you. And so I've heard of a number of people using 6 feet of this rigid pipe so that the entire time that you're running, you are sure to have 6 feet in between you. So it kind of, you know, keeps that distance between you, you know, at all times. So, you know, I haven't really heard much in terms of, you know, what effect that has on your ability to run comfortably or, you know, as you normally do. But, you know, it seems that it is effective in terms of keeping that distance between you. Now, I also haven't heard a lot of research on, you know, the differences between, you know, COVID spread out, you know, doing outdoor activities versus being, you know, inside and you know, in a contained area. But seemingly the practice that they're using with, you know, having that 6 foot rigid tether between them is helping. So we'll hope that that continues for sure.
Thank you, Eric, for this. So the forum is open for questions. You can unmute yourself and ask a question.
I think it's so cool, Bhumika, that you're doing yoga. That's
Yeah. So we have many of we do yoga, pranayam, breathing exercises, and it's really fun. They really enjoy it. I think it's a good alternative when you're doing a home workout.
Yes, I know. I agree. Bhumika has been giving a lot of home workouts And all the ladies who are training with her are doing amazing. It's really amazing what she posts and what we see also on the screen. And some of them with their kids also they're doing a lot of home workouts. And thanks to our dear Bhumika, she's really kept them energized,
That,
early morning. It's so nice to go online and see all these activities. So we also get enthused, elders like me at 75 want to do those things. Not stand on my head though, but other things. Thank you.
no, that's fantastic. And it's such an important part, especially during a crisis. Like I
Yes,
would be I would be much worse off if I didn't have my daily fitness, like
yes,
whatever
yes.
fitness can do during this time really helps you manage the crisis,
Yeah, 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 very definitely. Because I miss it. If I don't do it, I miss it.
Absolutely.
It has to become a way of life. Like the routine is set now, the discipline is set that you had to get up at 6 o'clock, you had to do your things. I mean, we have housework also because now even here in India we have no mates
Oh,
because
wow.
thanks to COVID.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, Uma, because there was a very clear line. Like when I started running, like it took a little while for me to get to that point where like I used to dread having to go out for a run, and and then there was just one day where it got to that point where it became that if I didn't go out for a run, then I felt like something was missing. So it was the important thing for me was getting to that point where you cross that line.
Yes, yes, that's very important also. Plus, now even at
Karishma,
our
you have a
age,
question?
Hello everyone.
we all have become very, very,
Uma, can you unmute yourself?
yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello everyone. Just wanted to know how can we increase our speed of walking or running?
Well, I mean, my suggestion for building or increasing speed is, gradual. Depending on, what your current distance or activity is, I always suggest a gradual approach. Obviously, if you try and be too aggressive about building speed or making gains too quickly, there can be risks associated with that for injury or or doing some damage, and you don't want to do that. So I always strongly urge people to be cautious and very careful in terms of increasing either effort or speed. So generally what I have done is worked with goals. I usually look at whatever my target pace is at any given time. If I desire to kind of build on that or target a faster time, I would set kind of reasonable goals to kind of get there. So I don't know if you're walking currently and you want to walk 5 kilometers in a faster time. I would just kind of gradually build up and and add smaller segments of faster effort in a consistent way to get there. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, yes. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Bhumika.
Hi, Rupa.
Hi, Eric.
Hi, Rupa.
Hi. Actually, I had a question like in COVID, in today's scenario, if visually impaired in contaminated area and a guide runner is not around him, so what activities he or she can do at home?
Well, it can be tricky. I have had a lot of experience where I think most closely, there have been times where I've needed to travel and I've been in unfamiliar places where I didn't know local guides and, I didn't know the local surroundings. So it wasn't so easy to just go out and find a trail to run on. And so, there have been times where I've had to get really creative, be it in a hotel room or even at times, just kind of like in my living room, like, you can actually get a surprisingly good workout in a very secured area. Like, you can maybe get a yoga mat. It's still possible to get the heart rate up. You can run in place. You can do things like yoga, like Bhumika's doing. And
Yeah,
I'm
she's doing.
I have long said that I would like to bring some more yoga into my routine, and I just haven't done it. But I mean, you can sweat and you can build fitness. It also helps, if they have access to, even like bungee cords, like I was describing, that we typically
Yeah.
use for tethers while running. You can actually put those bungee cords around, like a railing on the staircase, and do like pulls with your arm where you're actually building muscle, and again, you're building strength.
Yeah.
So sometimes it takes a little bit of creativity, but again, like I was just saying to Uma, there are days where if I miss a workout, then I don't feel the same. I feel kind of out of sorts the rest of that day. So having some fitness in your routine is important. And again, when you need to, if you get creative with how you accomplish it, you can get a workout done in almost any situation. And so sometimes it just, finding the right way to do it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Super. Any other question?
With all these schedules, your work schedule, how do you manage with all these activities and then work schedule, and the household duties will be there, I know, in US, like how we have here also. But don't you think it is difficult to manage so many things, balancing act?
It definitely is, Uma. And I'm very, very blessed that I have the strong support network that I do. As Bhumika said, she met my wife and daughters, and, if they weren't so tolerant of, of everything that I'm involved with, then it would be I mean, they're wonderfully supportive. I'm very, very fortunate that both of my daughters are kind of following the example, and they're gravitating towards fitness themselves. And like all of this week, they've each, again, they're 14 and almost 12, and like, they're both going out for short runs with me every afternoon. So I'll run with my normal guides in the morning, and then we'll go out with I'll go out with one or the other of my daughters on, depending on what day, and we'll go for 2 miles, a short little quick jog. But again, they love it, and they're getting a lot of enjoyment out of it. So again, having a strong support at home makes a huge difference.
Yes.
And
daughters make a huge difference.
It does.
That's what I think.
I agree with you. I'm
Good show. Thanks. Thanks. Enjoy the long weekend now with your family time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question here. So
Hi.
great story so far. I just wanted to understand what are different challenges you see with the guide runners and how they can working with the visual impaired.
Well, I mean, I think again, as I emphasized during the questions, like, if a guide runner has the desire to help, I mean, that's number one. So if they have that, then everything else is easy. Like, and so sometimes it just takes a little bit of, patience in finding the right pair, right? Like, as I said, it's a relationship like any other relationship. So some people, naturally click, I don't know if that's a term that you use, but like, when you click with someone, it's like you find, like Bhumika and I running together was very natural. Like I felt like we automatically just worked well together. And so, that may not necessarily always be the case. Like, there may be times where you have to try running with a few different people, but generally speaking, just having the willingness to volunteer and the desire to help are the main the main things. And so then once you have that, just communicating, all the things I was emphasizing, like communicating openly and just being honest and stating clearly what your goal pace should be and that kind of thing. I mean, it's not really difficult. It's just kind of a new activity for most people that are trying. I don't think there's any major challenges to it. I think again the willingness and the desire to help are key, and after that just working together and communicating openly.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Somebody asked about Braille and tactile. Are we still using Braille and tactile for any of the education or any of the other activities?
Yes, I wanted to know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Braille, Braille is very important for many blind people. I can say that, as someone who has been losing my vision gradually over many years and becoming blind as someone later in life, like I haven't learned Braille yet myself. And, I know a number of people that, it seems generally like people who lose their vision later in life don't necessarily know Braille, but all of my friends who were either born blind or became blind at younger ages, like they all definitely know Braille. So I'm, Braille is definitely still very important in terms of, learning materials for blind and visually impaired people. As I understand it, I think in India, you have the largest population of blind and visually impaired. So I would guess that Braille is, highly used, within the blindness community in India. And tactile, I mean, for sure. I mean, with a lot of the smart devices, it's surprising, like, I remember when like the first smartphones, like the iPhone and the kind of flat screen devices were coming out, there was a lot of concerns in the blindness community about how accessible they would be because they didn't have any tactile controls. But it's also been amazing to watch how, with all the speech output and like the voice activation, like all of the kind of voice activated features are really doing wonders in terms of accessibility. So, tactile is still important for the most part. Like, on my household, like my stove or oven and my refrigerator, like having tactile features available is important. But, in terms of gadgets and smart devices, it's definitely something they've adjusted to in terms of having speech output.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. And I'm
Thank
also
you.
included by this camera, that small little thing which you have on the bridge of your nose. I don't know. I've never seen that before. I don't know. Bhumika knows about it, whether it's available in India, because that is so fascinating for me.
Oh, I didn't catch that. You said the small thing on the camera?
Yeah, the camera in between your bridge. You said that the Google camera, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the Ira smart glasses. They have, like, these aren't them. These are just glasses that I wear, but they have a version of glasses where they have a camera mounted right on the bridge of the nose. So
It's
that,
currently not there in India, is what.
Not there. Oh, then I.
hello,
Am I audible?
I hear you.
Okay.
Oh, Sunil.
Yeah, I have a small query of diabetic runners. So how can they be handled? Because the sugar levels are of a major concern, and one has to be very, very careful because there are several parameters. There is enthusiasm, there is, energy to run through with the best timings that the runner might, want to do, but the sugar levels have to be taken into control. So, any guidance from your side? So, how we can learn to handle this situation?
Yeah, I know. I know a few visually impaired runners who are, with diabetes, and I know that managing their blood sugar is extremely important. I'm not very well versed in, the technology as that they have available for doing that, but I know that with strenuous exercise like running, it becomes even more important because there can be added challenges associated with strenuous exercise when regulating blood sugar. So I hesitate to make any suggestions because I'm not medically qualified to do so, but my strong recommendation would be to follow the medical guidance that they've been given in terms of managing their diabetes, but also being mindful that strenuous exercise also directly affects your body's blood sugar. So you definitely absolutely need to take that seriously and monitor that closely when engaging in strenuous exercise. So yeah, Sunil, I'm not sure I have much better an answer for you than that. But
I
yeah,
wanted to discuss, like, just sharing an ideation of a topic that, which is of a major concern, because India is, it is it's a land of diabetes. Around more than 80 million people are diabetic. And
yeah,
there are two types of diabetes. One is the type 1, where the insulin is not produced by the body. The other is the type 2. So during a run, many runners might be carrying their own feed, their own hydration, and these hydrations are basically sugar loaded. So the spike in the energy level, the spike in the sugar, combination of running versus balancing, what are you eating, what are you drinking during the run, just to finish off a run that is it may be a 5K, it may be of 10K, where the runner is into full enthusiasm of personal achievement of timings or running through with a pack of friends. So, a lot of parameters are here. So, what
yeah,
is the guidance for a guide runner to handle this kind of a situation? It may be that the guide runner is, planning, maybe hypothetically talking, a runner is planning, a 3 hour, 21-kilometer run, hypothetically talking. But the enthusiasm, the energy, the atmosphere is so pepped up that, he starts running, or he or she starts running more than the scheduled planned time run, trying to finish off in 2:45 or maybe 2:50 or 2:35. So that makes the guide runner a little bit uncomfortable because he or she is not mentally prepared that this would be an energy burst run from the uh, you know the
yeah,
runner. So
yeah,
what are your final points of guidance to the guide runners so they can handle the situation, you know, at that
yeah.
at that ground level?
Well, I mean, my recommendation in that circumstance would be to, essentially be an additional support for the runner. I mean, I would, um, you know, my assertion would be that the athlete, with diabetes, should know what they need in terms of, managing and, and you know participating in the activity. So if if they need to carry a specific nutrition, or they, I'm sorry, um yeah, I think, Sunil, just to, to have like I'll give an example just based on my own experience, because you know, that's what I feel more comfortable speaking to. Like when I run with guide runners, you know, oftentimes in a race setting, it's much easier for them to break away from me and go to get, you know, water or aid at the aid station and bring it back to me than it is to have me try and go with them over to the aid station and come back onto the race course. So like, you know, a lot of times being a guide runner requires, you know, you to kind of adapt to, you know, whatever the needs are of the blind athlete. And that's asking a lot. And, you know, again, it's part of the selfless act of guiding. But, you know, really whatever the athlete, you know, needs, either to manage their diabetes or to manage their race on race day, like, you know, oftentimes it involves, you know, you helping manage some of that as the sighted guide, you know, helping them. I don't know if that is a good answer for you.
Yeah, so actually, Sunil, before we even train with the athlete, we take the entire assessment. Like the last session, we had an assessment checklist that we prepared, and before we take up any activity with them, we do go by the checklist to know their general well-being. If there are any red flags like these, there will be an advice which will be taken from the specialists, like a medical doctor and any other specialized people who are required. And only then the exercise would be, the fitness activity would be started with a runner. And if there is extra medications which need to be carried in the race, which are like insulin injections and things, I would say the guides would then discuss this on very in a detailed level, the plan, and they would go by the plan, and they would not change it in the race, because these are very sensitive situations, and we will go with the plan for it, and it won't be an unplanned activity.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Sunil.
thank you. Thank you.
So last and final question, anybody? We have Shonzen on the call. She's a fast runner from Delhi, visually impaired runner. Shonzen, would you want to ask a question? We have Khodaji from Ahmedabad too.
Right.
All right, so if there are no questions, I think we can close the session. And thank you very much, Erich, for your time. And it was a very insightful session. And thank you for all the hand-holding and the mentoring you have been doing for our team for the last few years now. And thank you all for joining into the session. Erich, any last and final words for the team?
No, I mean, as you know, Bhumika, I very much appreciate the opportunity. I applaud sincerely what you all are doing, and you know, I'm very honored to be invited to join you all. So, thanks everyone, and I hope you all stay safe and healthy, and keep up the great work.